By visiting the current version of the site, you could identify some limitations of a static website. Now, before we start looking in ways to overcome those limitations, it is important to understand why a static website has such limitations. So let's now take a look at how the server works and what is a static request. A static request begins by the user typing a URL, clicking on a link, or interacting with your web page in some way. Now that generates an HTTP request to the server. Now the server receives that request and will start looking on its file system for the file that you have requested. Most of the time you request an HTML file, but that request can be to a CSS file, an image file, a PDF file, or whatever file you might think about. Now the server will ultimately send a response back to you. Now that response, if successful, will be the file that you have requested. In such case, it's called the 200 status. So the status of the request will be 200. The request is okay, it's a success. The file has been found on the server and has been sent back to you. Now, sometimes there is a mistake. Sometimes the requested file cannot be found on the server. In that case, the server will send a response back to you, but that response will be an error. And that's the infamous 404 error, which is the file not found error. Now, the browser receives the response from the server and will only render the HTML that it receives. Take a look here at the first and the last step of that request. It's in gold and it begins by the user interacting with your web page and it ends with the browser rendering the HTML received from the server. Now, let's talk about the answer from the server a little bit more. The browser receives the HTML code, and the browser's job here is to render that HTML code, only to render it. Now, sometimes to render that HTML code, additional support files are needed. So the browser will make some additional requests to those support files that are needed to render the page, and those are the CSS, JavaScript images, and so on. Now, let's take a look hands-on to that system in the browser. Back to the web browser, which is Google Chrome in my case. This is the homepage of the website that we will work with. And I really like Google Chrome when I develop web pages because Google Chrome includes some developer tools that I really like to work with. On the Mac, they are situated on the View menu, then Developer, and then Developer Tools. It's a little different on Windows, but you have those tools installed as well. So if I open those developer tools, and by default they appear here on the side, I will go to the Network tab of the developer tools and I will refresh my page, which will enable me to see all the requests that have been made to render that page. Now, obviously, the first request, the main request here is to the index.html file, which is the file that I have requested. Let's make that a little bit bigger like that. Okay. So if I take a look at the request, this is the request that has been sent to the server. Now, to be honest, there is no actual server just yet because, as you can see, we have made that request directly to the file system, but the idea is just the same. So we have requested that HTML file, and the response that we have received is the HTML code of that file. Now, to render that page, we need some additional support files. We need a CSS file right here. And look, this is the file that has been requested. And this is the response received from the server. So the browser receives those things and will ask for those additional files as well. They have been loaded here. So this is the core, this is the typo, this is the homepage .css. So those are the styles that we need to render that page. In addition to the HTML file and the styles, we also need some, here the jQuery library, some JavaScript file, another JavaScript file to take care of the menu, and we also need some images. You see, all those images are different requests that have been made to the server. Now, all in all, we need, you can see right here at the bottom, 20 requests to display that page. Now, let's hide those developer tools here. So to render that page, the browser has made 20 different requests to the server, the main request to the HTML file, but also additional requests for the images, for the CSS, for the JavaScript, and maybe other types of files as well. The browser's job here is to merge all those files together and to render, to generate the view that you have in front of you. So what are the consequences of this system? Well, all visitors in this case visiting a certain page will see the very same content. It's one single page that is sent back to every browser that asks for that page. Now, the content of the page will only change when you, the webmaster, the developer of the website, will manually change the page and upload a new version of that HTML file to the server. Only at that moment will the server send an updated content to the visitor that requests a certain page. So this explains why we need to go through a lot of pages on our website when we want to publish a new news, or when we have to move an event from the upcoming events list to the past events list.